Tonight, something we simply have not seen before. Every president, going back to the beginning, comes into office with his own ideas about how to govern, his own priorities, his own agenda, some or even all of it differing from the previous chief executive. Never, though, have we seen a president so seemingly bent on reversing, negating, even obliterating his predecessor's signature accomplishments. Today, President Trump struck a body blow at Obamacare. He did the same to the multi-country nuclear agreement with Iran. And over the last 9 months, the president has reversed or tried to reverse a long list of President Obama's actions on immigration, on children of undocumented immigrants, the Paris Climate Accord, Cuban President Obama's Clean Power Plan. If you want to know what President Trump is against, you only have to look at what President Obama was for. And in all fairness, none of this should be a surprise. He campaigned on much of it, and if nothing else, he's keeping his promises now. What may be surprising, though, or at least being widely debated, is how much of this is personal. What also stands out in both actions today is how each one shifts responsibility and accountability away from the White House onto Congress. And on health care, how little consideration was given for the consequences of undoing something, Obamacare, without a replacement for it.
One by one, it's going to come down, and we're going to have great health care in our country. We are going to have great health care in our country. We're taking a little different route than we had hoped, because getting Congress, they forgot what their pledges were. So we're going a little different route. But you know what? In the end, it's going to be just as effective, and maybe it'll even be better.
That was the president today after announcing late last night he was immediately ending cost-sharing subsidies that reimburse insurers for reducing deductibles and copays of lower-income Americans on Obamacare. Nearly 6 million people benefit from them. The president put their fate in the hands of Congress. Phil Mattingly has more now from Capitol. So Congress could have done something to guarantee these payments at any time. Will the president's actions actually spur them to do something now?
It's certainly on the table. Look, it's not just because Democrats have made clear that they don't plan on leaving Congress this year without something done, and the Republicans are going to need their votes on several must-pass items over the course of the next 8 to 10 weeks. But it's also Republicans, and Republicans have always been the issue here because, Anderson, as you point out, Congress always could have solved this problem. In fact, a U.S. court said Congress was supposed to solve this problem, deeming the executive branch paying these on its own essentially illegal, unconstitutional. It was up to Congress. But the secret here that wasn't so secret is Republican lawmakers, particularly as they were pursuing the repeal and replace effort, wanted the administration to keep paying these. They understand how important they are to the markets, even though they were opposed to the underlying law. Now that repeal and replace had failed, they didn't make any type of concerns raised about them being paid. They understood that this needed to happen. But the problem remains, can Republicans actually pass something, Anderson? There are deep divisions inside the party. While there are Republicans that have been working on legislation to try and address this issue for months now, there are other Republicans who have made very clear to leadership, this is part of Obamacare. We pledge not to fix Obamacare. We pledge to repeal Obamacare. Until leaders can actually figure out how to bridge that divide, as of now, they have no answers, Anderson.
And Republican leaders, I mean, their legislative schedule is packed with must-pass items from the sources you're talking to. I'm wondering, are they frustrated that this has now been put on their plate?
The short answer is yes. Look, Republican leaders haven't tipped their hand one way or the other. The statements we've seen from the Speaker, from the Majority Leader, were complimenting the President on doing something that the court basically said that they had to do. But here's the kind of broader issue here. When this news came out last night, Republican leaders hadn't even been told, sources tell me. Nobody called from the White House. Nobody told them this was coming. And there's a recognition, as you note, that there is a packed legislative schedule full of very complicated, complex issues. And this only essentially rolls a hand grenade into what's going on. I had one aide tell me earlier, look, there's no question about it. This complicates our life. We've grown kind of used to this, but we wish we would have known about it in advance. It's important to note kind of how the president views this, and this is according to multiple sources who've been involved with conversations with him. It is a bargaining chip, period. That is how he's always viewed it. That's why he had them being kind of paid out on a month-to-month basis, and that's why he's decided to pull the plug now. In doing so, he has certainly made life more complicated for Republican leaders, Anderson.
All right, Phil Mattingly. Phil, thanks. Before moving on, one other note, a case of the president not only emulating President Obama, but surpassing him. Yesterday's executive order undoing a different piece of Obamacare was his 49th, not just more than President Obama, but more than any president in the last 50 years. Candidate Trump, you'll remember, railed against them before and during the campaign. He's resorting to executive action, as President Obama did, because of congressional inaction. Here to talk about it is former Michigan Democratic Governor Jennifer Granholm and former GOP Senator and presidential candidate Rick Santorum. Senator Santorum, is it hypocritical for the president to use more executive actions when he was so critical of President Obama for them?
The answer is I would say yes. I mean, if you're going to go out there and criticize someone for using executive orders and then you use them yourself, then you should suffer the consequences of your previous statements. I think both President Obama and President Trump, as you just mentioned, are very frustrated that Congress didn't act. Frankly, I don't think that's a good reason to use executive orders, but both of them did.
But you support the ideas behind this executive order?
I do. No, I think what the president did with respect to suspending Obamacare CSR payments, cost sharing reduction payments, was the right thing to do. Look, the district court was very clear. I think if they had appealed it up, it would have been confirmed by upper courts. There's no authority that the president had to spend this money, and they were held off, I think, as long as they felt they could, with a credible face that they're pursuing the litigation, to the point where they said, you know, we're not going to do this anymore. And Congress, you need to fix this. You want the money, you need to fix it. And what I think President Trump realize that the Democrats are not interested up until this point in fixing it, because why buy the cow if you can get the milk for free? They were getting these payments. They didn't have to give up anything in any kind of deal to continue the payments coming. Now the milk's not free anymore, and we'll see whether they're willing to buy the cow.
Governor Granholm, I saw you tweet earlier today. You said, hey, at Real Donald Trump, killing health care for millions of average folks, feel better now, privileged billionaire, happy to hurt real people. Isn't dismantling Obamacare, however, exactly what he promised to do and what people elected him to do?
Well, dismantling Obamacare and replacing it with something. So they haven't been able to replace it. And so what the effect of these two executive orders that he's issued in the past couple of days has been is to put real people with real pre-existing conditions or health concerns, their interests are completely subsumed by his rabid desire to dismantle whatever Obama has touched. To me, what he's engaged in is active measures to vandalize the health care of millions of people. So if it's supposed to go back to Congress, fine. We've got Republicans and Democrats who are willing to work on fixing whatever he's done, but whatever before existed that needed to be fixed in Obamacare. Let's get it fixed. There was just a poll that was issued by the Kaiser Family Foundation, and even Republicans, by a 5-point majority, do not want him to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. They want him to fix it.
Senator?
Well, here's what I would say, that we're going to see a test coming up here in the next few weeks, because these cost share reduction payments are stopping. It's going to affect people who have silver plans. If you have a bronze plan or a gold plan under Obamacare, you don't get cost share reduction payments. So only a sliver of the market gets these cost share reduction payments. Well, again, it depends on what kind of plan you have. I mean, it could be lower income people have bronze plans or less expensive plans. But the bottom line is that we're going to see whether the Democrats are serious about actually trying to do something. Because if their answer is, give us the money, but we're not willing to make any changes to make middle class, to use your term, to make. But it is what they said, because they've rejected any type of flexibility that actually is going to lower rates for people who are out there on their markets right now who don't get subsidies from the federal government. You're talking about small business people or people who work for small businesses. You're talking about middle income Americans who've seen their rates go up by double in the last couple of years. I mean, you're talking about huge increases, and nothing's being done, and Democrats are resistant in making any structural changes to Obamacare to make that happen.
You are not listening. I don't know what's in your ears, but you have not been listening to what Democrats have said. They have been saying, fix it, mend it, don't end it.
What have they proposed,
Jennifer?
Other than more money, what have they proposed? What have they proposed?
There has been a bipartisan proposal that, Senator Alexander and Senator Murray have been working on.
I've looked at that proposal in great detail.
Oh my gosh.
I've looked at that proposal in great detail, and there is absolutely
fixes, including, including allowing the government to negotiate for the reduction in the costs of prescription drugs, including making sure that there are carrots and sticks to get more insurers into the market, including making sure that you provide incentives for more people to sign up. What the president has done has gone in the exact opposite direction. This so-called freedom you described, that was tried in a half a dozen states in the 90s, and all of those plans failed miserably. They were undercapitalized, and they were also used by ne'er-do-wells to try to put these scam subprime insurance policies on the market, and you're going to see after this, you're going to see attorneys general across the country bring lawsuits. Why can't we get a fix? And Rick, you cannot say
All right, Senator,
that Democrats don't want to fix it.
I want to give you the final word.
In fact, I can say it because I've looked at the Alexander and Murray proposal. And
I am telling you, they want to fix it.
Yeah, all I'm
They
telling you
want
is
to
what the
fix it.
facts are that the proposals that have been put forward by the Democrats have been almost zero reform. You've mentioned several things you mentioned are basically more money to be pumped into the system to bring more people in. But as far as structural changes to the insurance markets, so the people who don't get the subsidies are actually going to have lower costs, nothing's being done because that requires a change in the fundamental structure of Obamacare. Ron Johnson and Mark Meadows, two folks who have been working very, very hard on trying to put together a Republican proposal along with others in the House and Senate. I think they're going to be introducing a plan next week that has common sense reforms in there, things like that we're going to have prices being published, prices for services and products being published. Those are the kinds of common sense things they're going to put forward that can lower rates, and we'll see whether Democrats come to the table or whether they come up with phony reforms that are going to do nothing to reduce costs.
We got to leave it
have
there.
the Democrats come in, let them do it, because they were willing to negotiate.
Governor Granholm, Senator Santorum, I appreciate it, both of you. Thank you.
Coming
up next, the president dismantling the Iran nuclear deal, and breaking news from Senator Bob Corker accusing the president of, in his words, castrating the Secretary of State. Well, the president's toughest Republican critic takes a new swing at the president's foreign policy. Speaking to the Washington Post, he expressed concern that the president was inviting, as he put it, binary situations, such as choosing between war and a North Korea or Iran with nuclear weapons. The problem, Senator Bob Corker told the Post, is that the president, in his words, has neutered his Secretary of State. You cannot publicly castrate your own Secretary of State, he says, without giving yourself that binary choice. The tweets, yes, you raise tension in the region and it's very irresponsible, but it's the first part, he says, the castration of Tillerson, that I am most exercised about. Senator Bob Corker's new remarks came to light at the end of a day that saw President Trump taking action on the Iran nuclear deal.
Today I am announcing our strategy, along with several major steps we are taking to confront the Iranian regime's hostile actions and to ensure that Iran never, and I mean never, acquires a nuclear weapon.
What he did was decertify the agreement and raise the possibility of pulling out of it entirely. The move allows Congress to impose new sanctions on Iran with a simple majority vote. As for why, he said that Tehran is not living up to the spirit of the accord. Keep in mind, as top members of his national security team are on record recently striking a different note.
Iran is not in material breach of the agreement, and I do believe the agreement to date has delayed the development of a nuclear capability by Iran.
My view on the nuclear deal is they are in technical compliance of the nuclear arrangement.
Do you believe it's in our national security interest at the present time to remain in the JCPOA? That's a yes or no question.
Yes, Senator, I do.
His secretaries of defense, state, and the Joint Chiefs Chairman, the UN inspectors monitoring the deal, also say Iran is in compliance. And while it's true that Iran has an active missile program and supports terror groups around the world, the nuclear deal wasn't drawn up to address any of that. There's lots to talk about tonight. Joining us is Fareed Zakaria, host of CNN's Fareed Zakaria GPS, and Mike Doran, the senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and former senior director of the National Security Council during the George W. Bush administration. Fareed, first of all, from Bob Corker himself saying you cannot publicly castrate your own Secretary of State, are you as concerned about that as the senator?
Well, I think it's very clear now that we essentially have no diplomacy going on in the United States. And the way in which the president has treated his Secretary of State is the most dramatic example of it. I remember James Baker, George Bush Sr.'s Secretary of State, Ronald Reagan's Chief of Staff and Secretary of Treasury, telling me once, the most important quality you need in a Secretary of State is not knowledge of the world, not smarts. It is that he have the trust and confidence of the president. Because when you go around the world and you're trying to make deals and you're trying to do diplomacy, the only thing anyone around the world is wondering, do you speak for the president? Do you have the trust and confidence? Are you speaking for the entire government of the United States? And it's absolutely clear that Rex Tillerson is not. And in that circumstance, he's sort of a dead man walking, whether he's in his job or not, because there's no diplomacy going on. Nobody believes he speaks for the government. The president publicly points out that he disagrees with his own Secretary of State. So it's sort of odd to imagine how this man could go around the world trying to negotiate. Who is going to make a deal with him? Who is going to give him an assurance when they know that his own president doesn't agree with him?
Mike, I want to turn back to the Iran deal announcement. I know you were no fan of the deal, but does it concern you at all that outside observers, European allies, even those in the president's administration, simply do not back up what he contends?
Yes and no. I don't think the president made this decision to decertify on the basis of technical compliance with the deal. I think the administration would say that they're not in the breaches that the Iranians have carried out they're not the problem. The problem is that the deal has strengthened Iran around the region, and we don't have a strategy for dealing with the totality of the threat that Iran represents.
Fareed, President Trump talked about, a number of major issues that the U.S. has with Iran, that they finance terror, they foment violence in Iraq, they imprison Americans. He's not wrong about any of that. Do those things have anything to do with this deal?
Anderson, imagine if Vladimir Putin had announced the day after the Iraq war that because the United States was destabilizing the Middle East, he was going to abrogate and pull out of all the arms control agreements that the United States had signed with Russia. It's not only completely illogical, it would be the upending of any kind of international order or framework. If other countries were to do what the United States just did, we would have chaos in the world. Of course, Iran is doing things we disagree with. Of course, Saudi Arabia is doing things we disagree with. Lots of countries are doing things we disagree with. But international agreements are signed for a specific purpose, and as long as you are maintaining that piece of that part of the puzzle, it has to be upheld. The president himself said in his speech that Iran was in technical compliance with the deal. He himself said they are not violating the letter of the deal because by saying they're violating the spirit of the deal. Well, everybody has their own interpretation of what the spirit of the deal is. But if every country in the world decided that they're going to start linking all these issues like this and abrogating deals willy-nilly, abrogating promises they've made, you would have no international order. This is something that goes far beyond the Iran deal. This is a question of whether the United States is going to keep its word on a deal that it admits the other party has not broken.
Mike, what do you make of Fareed's perspective?
First of all, President Obama made this deal against the will of the American people and against the majority opinion in Congress. So this deal wasn't something that was ratified by Congress and is the pillar of an order. It wasn't even. It was never even signed by anyone. The Iranians insist that this is not any kind of binding agreement themselves. So let's not turn this into a pillar of international order. And then secondly, let's talk about what
Mike, if I may, the majority of America didn't vote for Donald Trump, but we follow the rules we have. The rules are that the president is allowed to make agreements like this. If you want to talk about whether or not the majority of the country was behind it, well, the majority of the country wasn't behind Donald Trump. I still accept him as president.
Donald Trump won the presidency by the rules of our election system, our electoral system, and he has the right, just as Barack Obama has the right to make deals with Iran without running it through Congress. Donald Trump has the right to change it. What Trump has done here is offered Congress and offered our allies the ability to come together on a strategy to take care of the totality of the Iranian threat. That's an opportunity. That's not a problem.
Is it an opportunity for it?
Look, what he's done is essentially create complete incoherence, because on the one hand he attacks the policy bitterly, and then he says, well, I'm going to stay in it. I'm going to punt this to Congress, to a deeply divided Congress, and force them to clean up. It's an abrogation of responsibility. It is entirely a responsible act. If the president wants to walk away from the deal, I agree with Mike that he has the technical right to do so. I'm simply saying it's a terrible idea and it undermines U.S. credibility, but he does have the legal right to do it. But he won't even do that. It's an act of strange cowardice, producing a kind of incoherent foreign policy where on the one hand he says the deal is the worst thing in the world, and on the other hand he says, but I'm going to stay in it. Congress can decide what to do.
Give him some credit for flexibility and for opening up negotiations with the Europeans and with Congress. Now, he didn't just go out.
There are no negotiations with the Europeans. The Europeans have said they will not renegotiate the deal.
He did not simply go out and abrogate the deal. So he took a position between those who were saying walk and those who are saying fix the deal.
All right.
I want to hear what you think we can do to make this deal actually better, and what we can do about the Iranian aggression in the region. Complaining about Donald Trump isn't going to take care of those problems.
Isolating the United States and making Iran the victim won't help.
Turning our backs on our allies.
Play the aggrieved victim.
Turning our backs on our allies in the Middle East, the Israelis, the Saudis, the Turks, and others, is not was what isolated the United States.
All right. We got to leave it there. Mike Doran, thank you. Fareed Zakaria as well. When we come back, the president plays to his base at a gathering of social conservatives today. He claims nobody uses the word Christmas anymore. We'll get into that next. President Trump became the first sitting president to address the Values Voter Summit.
You know, we're getting near that beautiful Christmas season that people don't talk about anymore. They don't use the word Christmas because it's not politically correct. You go to department stores and they'll say Happy New Year, and they'll say other things, and it'll be red. They'll have it painted, but they don't say, well, guess what? We're saying Merry Christmas again.
Well, you got a standing ovation for that. Joining me tonight is Charlie Sykes, the talk radio host and author of How the Right Lost Its Mind, and CNN political commentator Scott Jennings, former special assistant to President George W. Bush. Charlie, the themes that the president hit on today, stopping what he called attacks on Judeo-Christian values, as he said, returning moral clarity to our view of the world, whether or not you believe that the president is actually doing that, are these the kind of topics that are going to help him keep the support of his base?
Well, obviously, so far it has. I mean, the Christian right, which rallied around Donald Trump, seems to be among the strongest support for him, you know, despite his personal conduct and character, et cetera. So I think he does understand what he needs to say on those particular issues. So, yes.
And Scott, I mean, the president, when he spoke at the Value Voter Summit back in 2015, he got booed at one point when he made fun of Marco Rubio. I mean, today he got multiple standing ovations. Has there been a dramatic change in how he's being perceived, do you think? Or is it that he's the president and it's his agenda and that's what they're standing for?
Well, I think that politics is comparative, Anderson. And back in 2015, he was being compared to other Republican politicians who had demonstrated a closer allegiance to Christian values in their own personal lives. Now he's being compared to the alternative, which was a Hillary Clinton presidency. And of course, the Values Voters Summit attendees far prefer what Trump is doing than what Hillary Clinton would be doing.
Charlie, does it surprise you the extent to which evangelical voters, but particularly evangelical leaders, have rallied around President Trump and continue to?
Yeah, it is stunning, and it continues to be remarkable. Of course, the binary choice is not between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. It's between Donald Trump and, I don't know, a person of good character. One of the most extraordinary things that has happened, though, is the fact that here's a guy who was asked, a little while ago, have you ever asked God for forgiveness? And he wasn't able to say that. Someone whose behavior, his personal character ought to be repellent to Christians. But one of the things that's changed is this attitude. There was no, I'm old enough to remember when Christians believed that character mattered and the private character of an individual was relevant to their public persona. Now in the era of Donald Trump, evangelical Christians, according to the polls, are one of the groups that is least likely to think that private character matters. So, again, it's not a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And this is what is so remarkable. It's between, what would Jesus do and what is Donald Trump doing? And I would submit they're not the same thing.
It is interesting, Scott, to Charlie's point that, in the past, during the election, you had a lot of evangelical leaders coming forward and say, well, look, we're not electing a pastor in chief. But I feel like in past decades, they would not have been saying that. There was talk of, the moral majority. People wanted certain attributes in their leadership. Does it surprise you, Scott, to the degree to which evangelical leaders continue to to speak up and rally around the president?
Well, no, it doesn't surprise me because he's largely doing the things that they want him to do. And yes, I agree with Charlie that I think his personal conduct at times is not what you would find in, most Christian leaders. But again, they didn't elect him to be the Christian leader. They elected him to be the president. And I think that they're thinking about the last 8 years in which they got nothing that they wanted. In fact, they think the country went, so drastically to the left that we don't even recognize America anymore. And now they see a president, again, who may have personal flaws that they don't like, but is trying to drag the country culturally back to the right, which is something they desperately want.
Charlie, does it just seem hypocritical to you to a certain degree?
Yes, it is stunningly hypocritical, and I think it's going to do a great deal of damage to the Christian right, which is more right now than Christian. Look, leaving aside the policy issues, tax reform, health care, and everything, I do think that the real damage that Donald Trump is doing is to the culture. And including the fact that he may not be, pastor-in-chief, but he is a role model. And the challenge of raising children in the era of Trump, look, we tell our children, tell the truth, don't be a bully. Don't act like, that kid on the playground who says he started it. And here you have Donald Trump, who, we like it or not, is a role model in chief. And he's living out really the opposite of all the things that we teach our kids to be and to do. So the argument that somehow that we support Donald Trump because he's pulling the culture back to the right, this is the damage. The culture is meaner, it is cruder, it is coarser because of Donald Trump. And I wish that Christian leaders would stand up and make a distinction between the policies they like and what Donald Trump is doing as a role model in this society.
Charlie Sykes, Scott Jennings, appreciate it, both of you. Thank you very much. Coming up next, a reality check on Puerto Rico. President Trump claims they're doing a great job there, even though 91% of the island is still in the dark. More ahead. President Trump keeps shifting his message on hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico. After hot and cold messages on Twitter this afternoon, he returned to the blame game, but also pledged his support when he spoke to our Jim Acosta.
We've done a great job in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has to get the infrastructure going. We're helping them with their infrastructure, but most important on Puerto Rico is their electric plants are essentially gone. Now, they were gone before the hurricane. They were in bankruptcy. They owed $9 billion. I think it was $9 billion. But we have to help them. But I love the people of Puerto Rico, and we're going to help them.
Well, keeping them honest, help is needed 3 weeks after the hurricane. 3 weeks, 91% of the island is dark tonight, 91%. Another 36% has no access to clean water or sewage service. With a reality check on the ground, there is our CNN's Ed Lavandera.
Along a winding road high in the mountains south of San Juan, this stream of water is a lifeline, a pit stop now in the daily routine for thousands of people. Beverly Cancel and her husband pull up under the makeshift water spouts, PVC pipes dipped into the stream overhead to divert the water into massive tanks.
Every day is a struggle. He wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning and he comes here, he fills up, and he takes it to our neighbors.
The water isn't safe to drink, but people use it to take showers, wash clothes, and cleaning. And for some, like Adrian Santiago, who've lost their jobs since the storm, delivering this water to residents is a way of making extra money. Santiago delivers the water to Nelson Vasquez, who lives several miles away. He keeps 2 large 55-gallon barrel drums in his garage next to a generator to power the basic necessities in his home. He says living in the storm's aftermath is like traveling back in time.
Our great-grandmothers, they used to carry cans of water on their hip from the lake to wash clothes.
The roadway into this neighborhood was washed away by the storm. There are about 40 families that live on the other side, essentially cut off from the rest of the town. So they're having to figure out ways to get in and out. And this is one of those makeshift ways, a path so that people can walk in and out of their own neighborhood. And on the other side of the road collapse is where we found Elizabeth Diaz caring for her newborn baby boy. Diaz gave birth 2 days before Hurricane Maria struck, and when she left the hospital, she walked out into the ruins left by the storm. Her only focus now is caring for her baby, who was born prematurely.
Yeah, she can't. Her house where she normally lives
is unlivable right now because of the hurricane damage. So she living here, no place for her to take a newborn baby. Here in the mountains of central Puerto Rico, many residents say they're settling into the reality that a normal day isn't even a flicker of light at the end of the tunnel yet. One man put it this way: "We're prepared for a dark Christmas. There will be no holiday lights decorating the island this year." And Anderson, you know, some of the sense that I got today in some of the places that we visited in that town is that people are really settling into this new routine, anything that is far from normal. People getting their hands on generators, creating some sort of system that will kind of keep them going for the next 6 to 7 months. And when you ask them what is a typical day like, they kind of give you the rundown of all of the things that would probably drive most of us crazy after some time, of all the things you have to do. Just struggling and fighting for those basic needs is really taking over everybody's day-to-day life.
Yeah,
Anderson?
No end in sight. Lavendera, appreciate you being there. Thank you. Up next, we're going to tell you about breaking news in the Russia probe involving one of the president's former close advisors. Well, it was a very big night even before the breaking news. President Trump taking 2 more shots at President Obama's legacy, undoing a vital piece of the Affordable Care Act and turning thumbs down on the nuclear accord with Iran. More on both in the hour ahead. But first, there's breaking news at this hour. Reince Priebus, former White House Chief of Staff, talking to Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team. Our Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto joins us now with details. So what do we know about this meeting?
This shows that Mueller's probe now is extending to the senior-most advisors to the president. We know this meeting took place today. Priebus's lawyer tells CNN that this was voluntary, that it was happy to cooperate. He was interviewed by members of Mueller's team. This took place at Mueller's offices here in Washington. I should note that Priebus, relevant to this investigation, not just due to his position as chief of staff during the administration, but remember, he was chairman of the Republican National Committee during the campaign, heavily involved during the campaign when, of course, Russian meddling in the election began. And Russian meddling is the topic, the main topic, the main subject of the special counsel's probe.
And do we know who else Mueller's interested in interviewing from the president's inner circle?
CNN's reporting is it extends to a whole list of some of the president's senior-most advisors. That includes his current communications director, Hope Hicks, his current general counsel, Don McGahn, his former press secretary, Sean Spicer. We also know that the special counsel has already interviewed the chief of staff of the National Security Council, that is Keith Kellogg, and the topics he wants to talk to them about, things like the firing of James Comey, the firing of Michael Flynn, his national security advisor, but also that famous meeting on Air Force One when the president and his advisors were crafting the initial misleading explanation of that Trump Tower meeting in June 2016 between his son, Donald Trump Jr., and lawyers who said that they were Russian lawyers, offering damaging information on Hillary Clinton. So a number of topics, a number of paths that the special counsel is going down with these interviews.
Yeah, Jim Sciutto. Jim, thanks. I want to get the panel's take. Bakari Sellers is here, Alice Stewart, Jeffrey Toobin, Tara Setmeyer, and Michael Scheer. Michael, how big a concern is this must this be for people in the White House? I mean, if one by one, former folks are being called in.
Well, so it's kind of a concern on 2 levels, right? From a political concern about the president and his fate, there's concern that the higher up Mueller goes in the administration, the more serious the investigation looks like, both in terms of the underlying Russia allegations, but also the obstruction of justice considerations that Mueller has clearly been looking into. And I think you can't underestimate the extent to which it's a personal concern for them as well, right? I mean, these are in some cases like young people or people who, aren't necessarily wealthy. They have to get lawyers. They have to, think about their own personal.
Right. I mean, it can cost tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands.
It can cost tens of thousands of dollars, and potentially, obviously, if a federal investigator is investigating you, there's the potential that you could end up in real legal jeopardy, as well as the political concerns for your boss.
Jeff, what does this mean in terms of where the investigation is?
Well, you can't tell for sure, but it certainly means it's not at the very beginning, because Priebus is, as we've discussed, very high up, and investigators don't start by interviewing the top people. They also, we always talk in these circumstances about interviews, but the most important thing of any investigation is getting documents, is getting emails, memos, and that's what the questioning usually consists of showing a witness a document and explaining the context of it. What this means is that the Mueller team has enough documents that they feel it's appropriate to interview Reince Priebus at this point. By the way, it doesn't mean that this will be the last time they interview him. Repeated interviews are common, but it does suggest that they are pretty far along in their investigation, and certainly not at the beginning.
But I mean, you talk about a guy who was in the room when it happens. To paraphrase Hamilton. I mean, he traveled with the president, as many people in the president's inner circle did, probably more than most chiefs of staff normally would have.
And I think a lot of that was, if you recall back during the campaign and in the beginning of this administration, a lot of times there was this feeling that you needed to be close to the president or the candidate at the time, because he would listen to the last person he sought information from, and that's how he would make his decision. And they just wanted to have access to the president. Reince Priebus was in that category. He and others in the top echelon of the campaign and the administration did spend a lot of time with the president. So clearly they have a lot of information that would be helpful and beneficial to Mueller's investigation. And as Jeffrey said, generally they don't start with the top people in these investigations. They start with people that may be a little more on the food chain, in hopes they will provide information for people at the top. I think the good thing with this, Priebus came out willingly and voluntarily in providing information. Others will too. It's amazing how a request from Mueller will get you to volunteer to speak with him. But they will provide information. And as we know, I think the best thing for this president and the Republican Party is to put all of this out there. Let's get this behind us so we can focus on bigger issues.
Let me just chime in quickly. There's no good part of a federal investigation when somebody the caliber of any FBI agent, but let alone Mueller, is kind of going through everywhere. It's going through your underwear. I mean, this is going to be a complete investigation. And we were talking about the timetable of where this is. To Jeffrey's point, you don't know where this is yet. We will know that it's coming to a conclusion when they interview Donald Trump, if they do get that opportunity. Jeffrey can probably speak to this better than I can, but we knew back during Whitewater that led to the eventual blue dress when Bill Clinton at the time was interviewed in the map room of the White House, and the grand jury was actually shown via video screen, and you knew then that the investigation was nearing a close. But everyone who was interviewed has exposure. As a lawyer, I tell my clients every single day that Martha Stewart did not go to jail for insider trading. Martha Stewart went to jail for lying to federal investigators. And so when you have this White House and everyone in it who's been allergic to the truth, this becomes a real problem as they're being interviewed by investigators.
The same thing happened with Bill Clinton. He didn't get impeached because of anything in particular that they thought from the beginning with Whitewater, which was a stock deal. It was land because that's right, land deal, cattle futures and things, and he got in trouble because he lied about an affair. So anyway, but look, none of this is ever good for the president. So I'll be very curious to see how he reacts. He's already begun tweeting tonight about Pakistan and other things. Anytime this investigation starts to get a little closer, we start to see Donald Trump start tweeting things out for disinformation purposes. Reince Priebus, we also have to remember, is not one of the necessary Trump loyalists.
Right, he came relatively late to the party.
And he was not exactly on board in the beginning either. He was part of the establishment. He was reluctant, but he recognized for his political survival that he needed to get on board the Trump train. But if it comes down to it, I don't think he's going to be someone that's going to protect the president.
Michael, I mean, Sean Spicer reportedly took very careful notes, and obviously that will be something that's of great interest.
Right. So both Sean Spicer and Hope Hicks, one of the things that we understand that that Mueller is looking into is that moment on the plane on Air Force One when the president and his aides are drafting a kind of initial statement in response to reports that there had been this meeting with the Russians where somebody had come and said...
Right, for Donald Trump Jr.
With Donald Trump Jr.
And initially the president's people around him said, oh no, he wasn't drafting it, it was Donald Trump Jr.'s lawyers. I mean, I think Jay Sekulow was...
Right, so there was that, and they said it was initially about, the meeting was just about adoption, and it turned out it was about, an offer to provide damaging information on Hillary Clinton. And so, it's things like that where the investigators are going to go back to the people who were on the plane, who were with the president drafting that initial statement. That includes Sean Spicer, that includes, we think, Hope Hicks. And the investigators are going to ask them very detailed questions about how that statement came to be, and then compare that to the statements that other people make.
A lot more to talk about, including the president's decision to decertify the Iran nuclear deal, essentially put the next move in the hands of Congress. We're going to be joined next by the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. Also later, kids taken from Central Africa, sold to American families, who thought they were actually adopting orphans. How could this happen? It's part 2 of our exclusive CNN investigation.
Mama, what's today? What? What's today? I don't know. Yes, you do. What?
The president, as we said, is undoing 2 major pieces of the Obama legacy, and part of the debate concerns whether he's doing it despite the risk, despite to potential human and monetary cost, without a clear plan for what comes next, primarily because to him this isn't really about any of that. Instead, say critics, this is personal, about negating most things from the Obama administration. On the other hand, this is what the president campaigned on, what he promised to do. CNN's Ryan Nobles has more on Iran and Obamacare, joins us now. So Ryan, just explain the step that President Trump took today regarding Obamacare.
Essentially what he did, Anderson, was say that the administration was going to hold cost-sharing reduction payments. And these are payments that are given to insurance companies to stabilize the insurance market under the Affordable Care Act. Now, this is a provision that was ruled unlawful by a federal court, and it's something that Republicans have criticized for some time. But it was something the Obama administration continued to do, and we should point out that the Trump administration continued to do up until this month. And the reason being is that it is very important to stabilize those insurance markets. And there are many people, not just Democrats, but Republicans as well, who are concerned that if these payments don't stay in place, that that premiums for many Americans could skyrocket.
In terms of the Iran deal, the president's threatened to rip it up. He stopped short of doing that today, though.
No, he did not rip it up by any stretch, Anderson. Instead, he sent this provision to the Congress, and now Congress has 60 days to come up with a plan as it relates to Iran. And what he's hoping is that the Congress comes back with something that is a lot tougher on Iran, with much stricter sanctions and forcing them to adhere to the letter of the law as it comes to this deal. But it's important to point out, Anderson, that even the administration admits that Iran has lived up to their end of the bargain. They're just upset that they haven't followed the spirit of the law, which is very difficult to understand and put a finger on. And there are members of his own administration, including his Secretary of State and his Defense Secretary, who've recommended against this. It now will be in the hands of Congress to decide what's going to happen. And the president said today that if Congress doesn't come up with a plan that he likes, he may just pull the United States out of this deal with Iran.
Ryan Nobles, appreciate that. Our next guest has watched Iran's nuclear program grow over the years, has seen the changes since the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, joins us now. So, Director Clapper, President Trump today said that Iran was violating the spirit of this agreement. When you had full access to intelligence, was that your assessment as well? And do we know, since the president took office, has that changed?
Well, I don't know exactly what that means. Clearly, there are ambiguities in the JCPOA, which we're very sensitive to. And, of course, the Iranians were probably exploiting those ambiguities. But in large measure, as others have said, they are in material compliance with the agreement. So I think this has huge implications for us. One, I think with the other members of there are 5 other countries involved in this agreement. The other permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, in addition to Germany, and all of them are not going to decertify. I also think if the objective here is to put more pressure on Iran, I think we're going to have great difficulty putting Humpty Dumpty together again and reassembling the international coalition of sanctions, which is what brought Iran to the table in the first place. Another dimension of this is how this is going to play in Iran domestically. This plays to the hardliners in Iran who were not in favor of any sort of engagement or negotiation with the United States, and this plays right to their hand. As well with Korea, I think the notion of negotiation or diplomacy, which to me is the only realistic way ahead here, North Koreans are skeptical anyway about the United States, are probably not going to be very interested in any negotiating on treaties from the United States. I do find it incongruous that we're concerned about Iran complying with the spirit of this agreement when the Russians are in abject violation of both the spirit and the letter of the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And you don't hear much about that. And that's something the Senate did vote on. And I don't know why we aren't concerned about that if we're concerned about Iran not complying with the spirit of the JCPOA.
Given that the other signatories to the Iran deal, our allies, are not going to decertify, I mean, there is some notion from Trump supporters that this is a kind of an opening salvo by the president, that this will lead to some sort of renegotiation of the entire agreement. That you think that's just a non-starter?
I do. I think that's going to be very hard, starting with the other parties to the agreement, the immediate parties, let alone the other countries who are also involved in enforcing sanctions. It wasn't just the U.S. imposing sanctions on Iran that brought them to the negotiating table. And for me, as I said before, if you give me a choice between a state-sponsored terrorism with a nuclear capability or a state-sponsored terrorism without a nuclear capability, I think I'd pick the latter. No one in the last administration for a moment had any illusions about Iran and its nefarious behavior, its destabilizing behavior in the region. But I would have preferred to use what has been negotiated, as imperfect as it is, as a building block and enforce it, the provisions of this, and I think House Foreign Affairs Chairman Ed Royce has spoken to this, enforce the hell out of the agreement, and then use that as a building block for addressing the other things that Iran is doing that nobody likes.
I want to ask you just lastly about Senator Corker, who spoke to the Washington Post in an interview that posted just tonight. He expressed concern that the president was inviting, as he put it, binary situations like choosing between war and a North Korea or Iran with nuclear weapons. The problem, he said, is that the president has neutered his Secretary of State. I believe he said you cannot publicly castrate your own Secretary of State without giving yourself that binary choice. Is he right about that?
Well, I think Senator Corker, being a senator, can be a lot more colorful about this than I would. I would certainly agree, though, that I think undermining his Secretary of State, undercutting him, particularly with respect to North Korea, and creating a binary choice where it's either fire and fury or destroying all of North Korea or nothing. And, of course, the North Koreans obviously find that very threatening. They play that to their domestic audience. And so this is very troublesome where that's the only choice. And the reason it's so troublesome for me, having served on the Korean Peninsula many years ago, is that the fire and fury and the destruction of North Korea will not be limited to north of the demilitarized zone. This will necessarily spill over into the south and have terrible, terrible consequences.
Yeah, I mean, a potential huge death toll, frankly, on both sides of the border.
Exactly.
Yeah. General Clapper, appreciate your time. Thank you very much. All of this, President Trump's decision on Iran, an executive order on health care, just the latest instances of President Trump unraveling President Obama's legacy. We'll get into that with our panel next. The second Obama legacy President Trump took aim at today is the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Candidate Trump, you'll remember, promised to repeal it, replace it, get something better. So far, Republican lawmakers have failed to do any of that, so now the president is taking executive action. As you might imagine, opinions differ on what he did, just as they do on Iran. Back now with the panel. It's not only, decertifying the Iran nuclear deal, the executive action on the Affordable Care Act, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, ending DACA. So much of what President Trump has done, Michael, just in the last 9 months is just reversing everything that President Obama tried to do.
Right. When the Obama administration was ending, one of the things that the administration officials, the former administration officials, worried deeply about was the extent to which so much of President Obama's legacy was built not on legislative success. Obviously, the health care bill was a legislative success, but a lot of the other things that he was able to accomplish were executive action because the Congress was reluctant to do anything. The Republican Congress was reluctant to do anything for him. President Trump has really, and his administration has really taken advantage of that, and they've rolled back regulations. They've reversed things that they could reverse, and some of that's been easier because of the way President Obama crafted his legacy over 8 years.
And Donald Trump as a citizen was very critical of President Obama for using executive action so much. President Trump has now used it more than President Obama did.
Nearly twice as much. And today is a hell of a day. All that Donald Trump has done is make insurance more expensive for poor people, destabilize insurance markets, and make it more likely that Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon. That's a hell of a Friday for absolutely anybody. And when you think about this, the reason being is Not that he has a vision for where he wants to go, because no one up here outside of America First and isolationism can tell us what, Donald Trump wants to do with the Iran deal. No one can tell us where he wants to go. He hasn't been able to articulate a clear plan for health care. But what we're going to do now is we're going to see that Republicans now own this. Republicans own the fact that premiums are going to go up 20% because of the fact that they are reducing these subsidies. They're going to own the fact that these markets are destabilized. They're going to own the fact that in a few years, I mean, if Congress doesn't make a decision on the Iran deal in 2017, 2018, Iran, then the shackles will come off and will have the ability to resume their nuclear program at a faster pace.
Okay, first of all, very rarely will you see me actually defend Donald Trump, but today I'm actually going to do that in some respects. First of all, it's not Donald Trump's fault that the insurance markets are going to be unstable or that premiums are going up. It's Barack Obama's fault because the way that Obamacare was structured. First of all, the part that we need to understand here is, yes, premiums are probably going to go up 20% if Congress doesn't authorize these subsidies to stabilize markets in the meantime for a short-term plan fix. But that's because of the way Obamacare was set up. It was illegally against the Constitution, the way that these payments were given out, that the Obamacare was passed with a section that did not have Congress authorize. It said that Congress had to authorize the money for these subsidies. Congress did not do that. So we have to be, yes, it does, Jeffrey. You know that. And a federal court ruled that it was unconstitutional. So what Donald Trump did today was simply follow what the court says and what's constitutionally required, which is for Congress to authorize this money.
My only response is that, yeah, that sounds good until you're somebody today who was trying to actually afford not a bronze plan, but maybe even a silver plan, and now your premiums are going to go up exponentially. And the most amazing part about this, the most amazing,
act like it's happening all of a sudden today.
It's going to go up exponentially. The most amazing part about this, and he's reintroducing junk plans into the system. So you're going to have plans that don't cover maternity leave. You're going to have plans that don't cover the basic fundamentals of pre-existing.
Not doing all of that.
It does.
This is still part of the overall problem with Obamacare that Congress certainly needs to fix. But what happened today was not any of what you're saying. 116% of premiums going up 116% in Arizona was happening before what happened today.
But do you also know what happened when those premiums were going up in Arizona? The subsidies were also going up. The fact of the matter is only 3% of the people in the market.
For the government to be paying these subsidies.
It's illegal to care for people now.
No, it's take that up with Obamacare. Did you read it? Section 1401 and 1402. I suggest you read it.
That section, one court has held that it is unconstitutional. That is not a resolved legal issue at all. And what it's similar to DACA in that the president is saying, well, it's unconstitutional, so I have to get rid of it. That's not settled. What is settled is that he got rid of it. And the fact is that, people will have to live with the consequences rather than letting the legal process go forward.
But people are already living with the consequences.
The bottom line is, I think what many on the left hate to acknowledge is that Obamacare is not working. Not only are the costs higher, but the choices are lower. We have 1/3 of the counties in the state that only have one choice of health care.
That's such a false premise.
In 2018, if the health insurance companies continue to bow out as they currently are, 1/2 of the counties will
let's just take a break. We're going to take a break.
Access to Medicaid.
We've got to take a break. We'll have more on this when we come back. We'll continue this discussion, including the president's latest call for Democrats to join him to make a deal. He says we'll talk about the possibility of that happening or the impossibility, as the case may be. We're talking about health care. The president scrapping critical health care subsidies that help pay out-of-pocket costs for nearly 6 million people. Part of his latest effort to do with the executive action that the Republican-led Congress so far has been unable to accomplish legislatively. And now the president wants to make a deal with Democrats, he says. Just moments ago, he tweeted this: money pouring into insurance companies' profits under the guise of Obamacare is over. They have made a fortune. Dems must get smart and deal. Back now with the panel. I mean, is there any chance of that?
Well, yes, actually, but not with this. There is actually a chance because Senator Alexander and Senator Patty Murray are actually working on an Affordable Care Act fix. I mean, the Congress is actually working on something that would fix many of these problems.
Just the subsidies.
Well, Donald Trump is not attempting to go down that path. And the fact is, what we know as a fact, Terry and I were arguing over, some politics of the issue, but what we know as a fact is today, premiums will go up 20 to 25%. and the deficit will go up $200 billion because of the actions that Donald Trump took today. Last time I checked, that is not a Republican philosophy. I mean, really, it's not a Democratic philosophy, and it's not an American philosophy at all either.
I think we've made progress just in the fact we have some Democrats even acknowledging that we do need to make some fix with Obamacare.
We've said that from the beginning.
And I think that Rick Santorum was right. You had him on earlier. I think the plan that Meadows and Johnson have been working on to deal with helping to stabilize the insurance market, which will help offset some of the costs from the reduction in the subsidies that the president wants to do. That is a good short-term fix to get us on the road through this next hump. But then at the end of the day, Republicans and Democrats need to get together for a long-term fix. I think that is a good short-gap measure for getting through to the next step.
Why does anyone think that Republicans and Democrats would actually get, I mean, I know Alexander's working on it.
Yeah. No, because it's happened before. Obamacare actually has over 100 Republican amendments, even amendments from Orrin Hatch. So let's not act as if this is not something that hasn't happened before.
That process, I was on Capitol Hill when that was going on, and Democrats were not exactly taking Republicans out to dinner and having drinks over, let's do Obamacare. It wasn't like that at all. It was quite a difficult process for Republicans to actually get anything substantively into these bills, and manipulations by Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid at the time to get this pushed through. It was a nightmare. But here's the really quick, just to finish that. This is the problem with the way that Donald Trump has approached Obamacare and repealing and replacing this, and not having all of the stakeholders involved early on. It's been a very disjointed messaging approach. So Republicans in Congress, they have a lot of philosophical differences on certain aspects of this, but without the president staying consistent and being a stakeholder on this, it's turned into a complete mess politically, and Republicans have 30 days to try to get something done here.
Well,
legislative days left in the year.
And count me as a skeptic on whether something's going to actually get done. I mean, we are marching ever closer to the midterms in 2018. The closer we get to that, there's going to be both sides making not so much a calculation on what can actually be done to get fixed, but who can be blamed for it, right? And the kind of discussion that we've had here today is going to be exponentially louder as if you assume that nothing does get done, and if you assume that the premiums do go up, and that insurance companies do pull out of the markets, and there is a kind of a worsening of the situation writ large, it's going to be Democrats fighting to blame the Republicans for it, and Trump, and the Republicans and Trump trying to figure out how to deflect that.
Why would Democrats work with Republicans at this point? It's a great political midterm wedge issue.
And the Democrats are not going to be all that eager to sort of take back ownership, as Bakari said, of the issue if it looks like, if the polls are suggesting that in fact, you know, around the country, Republicans in districts are taking on water for this.
And just to emphasize the point of how unlikely it is for Congress to deal with this, they have to do a budget or the government shuts down. They say they want to do income tax reform, which is like their big issue, their big accomplishment they want. The president put DACA on their laps, and today the president put Iran on their plate. All of which suggests that they're not going to do basically any of it except keep the government.
And they may be in town like 18 days.
30 legislative days left, so I think there's probably going to be some holiday.
So how do they do, I mean, can they make progress on any of that then?
Well, I think they have to do a budget or the government shuts down. They have to they have to do the debt they have to do the debt limit because or you know, there's financial chaos. But other than that, I mean, I don't see any of that happening.
I think Republicans are truly committed to doing something with regard to Obamacare. They know that they all campaign, many of them for the last 7 years.
No, I don't know what's happened.
But they have campaigned on repealing and replacing Obamacare, making changes, and many of them up for re-election. They have to get something done. So I think some of these short-term measures will help, but I think overall they realize we need to increase the competition to help lower costs, and that will at least show some of the constituents back at home they're putting a good faith effort in.
The only thing, it's irony, and I think the Donald Trump presidency has been full of irony. I mean, what he's done is he has slashed money for advertising for getting people to enroll on the exchanges. He's actually stopped enrolling people on Sundays. You go to this new cutting back on ensuring that individuals low-income individuals can have the subsidies to actually purchase insurance. And so it's just full of irony. And you think about his legislative accomplishments, you asked a great question. Outside of Gorsuch, there hasn't been anything done. I mean, I always go back to conjunction junction, how a bill becomes a law. I mean, you can't see where he's actually taken something, an idea that's gone through the process and came out with the signature on the desk. So why would anything change?
We got to take a break. Thanks, everybody. When we come back, part 2 of our CNN exclusive investigation into what could be child trafficking. Families adopted these little girls thinking they were orphans in need, when in reality they'd been taken from their birth mothers and essentially sold. Our Randy Kay investigates how this could have happened next. Last night we introduced you to Mata and Viola, the 2 little girls who were adopted by loving families in the United States who believed they were orphans in need. It turned out the 2 girls were taken from loving birth mothers and sold in what could be a child trafficking ring. Here's part 2 of our Randy Kay's exclusive investigation, Kids for Sale.
We unwittingly placed an order for a child. The only trauma this poor kid ever experienced was because we essentially placed an order for a child. She was home and happy with her mother and her family until we, like I said...
They selected her for us.
Selected her, Jessica and Adam Davis say, because they were willing to pay thousands of dollars to adopt Namata from Uganda. They say they were told by their adoption agency that Mata had been orphaned, only to find out later that wasn't the case at all. Mata wasn't an orphan. She and her family were duped. They believed she was pulled from her home and placed in an orphanage after the adoption agency had found the American couple, buyers in a sense, with money to adopt a child. The name of that adoption agency? European Adoption Consultants, headquartered in Ohio. It's the same adoption agency that Stacy and Sean Wells used. They adopted a young girl named Viola. Now both families believe the girls were part of a wider money-making scheme to sell Ugandan children to American families. Both the Davises and the Wells reunited the girls with their families in Uganda.
Well, was it hard to leave her?
It was. It was very hard. And I realized at that moment, she still felt like my daughter. And she still does to that moment. I knew she was where she was meant to be.
And both families say all of the heartache and outrage lies squarely at the feet of European Adoption Consultants, or EAC, which CNN has learned is now under investigation by both the State Department and the FBI. But was EAC part of a scheme to traffic children for profit? Or perhaps were they simply unaware of what was going on in Uganda? And the questions for the agency don't end there.
How could Jessica Davis and Stacy Wells have ended up with children who may never have actually been orphaned? That's what we wanted to know, and it led us here to Lake Dallas, Texas. Behind these gates lives the head of the EAC's African Adoption Program. But getting her to answer our questions was a challenge. I'm trying to find Deborah Paris.
Deborah Paris is her name. After trying to reach her by phone numerous times, we followed her for more than an hour by car, hoping to get answers for these families.
Deborah. What? Hi. I'm sorry. I'm Randy Kay with CNN. Well, we spoke to some women who had adopted children from Uganda, and they said that they were lied to. I know you ran the program for European Adoption Consultants.
I did not. There was 4 people.
But you were involved in the program for...
I'm not.
Both Jessica and Stacy say Deborah Paris was their main point of contact, the one who called them and told them what turned out to be false stories about the girls' family history. Both describe Paris as aggressive on the phone, demanding an answer right away as to whether or not they'd take the child. Deborah Paris denied having anything to do with the adoptions of children, seemingly orphaned for profit. The women in Uganda, the mothers, say that they never meant for their children to be adopted. You helped organize these adoptions. Can you answer that question? Were they lied to?
I did not organize these adoptions.
Despite her pushback about her role, Deborah Paris refers to herself in this email to a reporter as the director of Africa Program for EAC. You were the head of the Ugandan Adoption Program for...
Was not. Margaret Cole was.
Margaret Cole is the owner of European Adoption Consultants. This is her making a pitch for orphans in Panama.
They need food. They need some medicine.
Cole started European Adoption Consultants back in 1991. Since then, the agency has handled inter-country adoptions in more than a dozen countries, including Uganda, Bulgaria, Honduras, and Haiti. It's based in Strongsville, Ohio, which is where we hope to find Margaret Cole, so we could ask her some questions too. 6 different addresses and no luck. Calls to various phone numbers, also a dead end. This home of hers was raided by the FBI back in February, and so were the adoption agency's offices. Investigators left with boxes of evidence. In 2016, the State Department determined that EAC had exhibited a pattern of serious, willful, or grossly negligent failure to comply with standards for international adoption. As a result, it debarred the adoption agency, ordering it to cease all adoption services for 3 years. Among the key findings, EAC failed to engage in practices to prevent the sale, abduction, exploitation, or trafficking of children. It said the failure to provide adequate supervision contributed to many of the violations described above. Also that EAC failed safety procedures that prevent solicitation of bribes and fraudulently obtaining birth parents' consent. The State Department determined EAC offered consideration to birth parents to induce them to release their children for adoption.
They are getting the orphans because there's a dollar sign.
The U.S. State Department also found that EAC failed to take the proper steps to make sure birth parents consented to the termination of their parental rights in accordance with applicable laws.
Were these mothers lied to?
No, absolutely not.
These women say that they ended up buying a child instead of adopting a child.
The lawyer who processed the adoptions for EAC at God's Mercy Orphanage is this woman, Dora Marembe. We spoke with her by phone, and she denied any wrongdoing by God's Mercy.
She also insisted children are not being trafficked in Uganda through orphanages, and that neither she nor EAC ever trafficked children. She also said that the biological mothers of Namada and Viola did know their daughters were being adopted and taken to America. All of that despite the Ugandan government telling us that it shut down God's Mercy Orphanage because it was illegally processing guardianship orders and trafficking children, and the Ugandan courts finding that Mada's mother had been lied to.
What's unclear is how widespread the alleged trafficking scheme may be. CNN's investigation found it doesn't end with Viola and Mada. Viola's mother is still missing 2 other daughters who were adopted or sold off to American families. And remarkably, those families are aware they have children that never should have been orphaned, Karen Riley told us. She's an advocate for Ugandan children who runs a group called Reunite Uganda.
Both families are aware of the truth. They haven't responded back to me, but they appear to be continuing to live their lives and let the children believe what they've been told, and some of which is not true at all.
The Davises still speak to Namada via Skype. She is back in school and enjoying her new baby sister. The Wells have kept in touch with Viola, too. The 2 girls are now close friends in their village and have blossomed since returning home. Meanwhile, both Jessica Davis and Stacey Wells have been interviewed by the FBI, which declined to talk about the investigation with CNN.
Birth mothers, the most vulnerable birth mothers on the planet, are being taken advantage of in this way so that people can profit from adoption.
Anderson, Jessica and Adam Davis figure they spent about $65,000 adopting Mada, only to end up bringing her back to Uganda. Now that includes adoption fees and all of their trips. And Stacey Wells told me that she and her husband spent their life savings adopting Viola. As of now, neither family expects to get any of that money back. And also, I should note that no charges have been filed against Margaret Cole, Deborah Paris, or the European adoption consultants. The lawyer in Uganda who handled these adoptions also has not been charged. Meanwhile, it is possible, Anderson, that the adoption agency was simply negligent here, unaware, based on lack of background checks, that the children it was getting from Uganda were being trafficked. In other words, it could be that EAC is also a victim of this apparent trafficking scheme. We would have the answer to that question if the owner of EAC, Margaret Cole, would respond to our request for comment. In the meantime, the investigation is ongoing. Anderson?
It's an incredible story, Randy Kay. Thanks very much. We'll continue to follow it. Up next, a preview of Anthony Bourdain's next stop on Parts Unknown. He takes us to Lagos, Nigeria. We'll be right back.
Very diverse, very tasty.
This Sunday on Parts Unknown, Anthony Bourdain travels to Lagos, the largest city in Nigeria and all of Africa, home to about 20 million people, a city built on a lagoon and one of the fastest growing in the world. I recently talked to Anthony about it over some food at Chomp Chomp here in New York City. Take a look. So in this next episode, you go to Lagos.
Lagos, yes.
Which I've never been, always wanted to go. I mean, talk about a chaotic city. That's the way it seems
Incredible.
to me.
Imagine a city of 20 million people, most of whom provide their own electricity, their own water, often built their own homes, completely unregulated, often with 2 or 3 businesses that they've started themselves.
What's the food like?
Spicy, delicious. They love food. They love to cook. And there's a lot of exciting street food and, small businesses. Most of them completely unregulated and unlicensed. But the government's had to figure out a way to tax them. So the government will basically observe a business and decide an arbitrary number based on what appears to be going on. Whole cities growing up, spilling out into the lagoon, built out over the water with schools, brothels, hotels, barbershops, businesses.
How come I'm the only one sweating eating this?
I don't know, man. It's healthy sweat. The people are, I've never seen a population, the whole population, work so hard.
Wow.
Whether you're already doing well or whether you're below the poverty line, everybody's a true believer that if I just work really, really hard and figure out an angle or multiple angles, success will be mine. Right. And there are a lot of very successful people. It's an oil-rich economy. There's a lot of opportunity, a lot of hustle, a lot of inequity, a lot of great food, and a lot of really tremendous music and an incredible musical history, which we look into.
Cool.
And a psychedelic rock scene from the 70s that provided some great...
There's a psychedelic rock scene in Lagos, Nigeria?
In the wake of the Biafran conflict, there was an explosion of psych rock in Nigeria.
Wow.
And it is some of the trippiest, wildest, most awesome music, and we looked deeply into that subject.
How deeply?
Deeply, man.
Don't miss Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown in Lagos this Sunday, 9 p.m. right here on CNN. That's it for us. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. Time to hand it over to Don Lemon. CNN Tonight starts right now.